Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to check in and hope everything is going well. This week, all we're going to have is short essay 3, which, like the previous essays, should be building on the first two with the goal of getting to our final paper, which will be a combination of all three. So, as you recall, our first essay was a topic paper describing what topic you're interested in. The second one was looking a little bit more deeply into your topic, getting some literature on it, which most of you have done and they've been great. And finally, short essay number 3, which is going to be taking a look at the theories from our course in order to go back through and go into a little bit more depth about our topic. So basically what I want to do here is I'll go through the notes that I have pasted, and these are actually pasted directly in our Canvas page. So essentially what I wanted to do was just kind of walk through and describe what it should look like. But overall, what you would be wanting to get out of this paper is applying one of the three theories that we've taken a look at throughout the course. Broadly, we've looked at conflict theory, functionalism, and the interactionist perspectives. And doing a 1 to 3 page paper where basically you take one of these theories and apply it to your topic and your literature that you looked up so far. So I'll go through a few examples of this, and you all can check in with this, but essentially that's what we want to be looking at. And as far as order can go, this paper could be put in after the topic, the paper from the first essay, or it could go right after the second one, or you could have it as a standalone one. But our end goal is going to be to have this theory paper embedded in your final paper. So essentially I'll go through the basic requirements and then I'll give you, there's some additional notes we could take a look at. The main requirements is basically briefly picking a theory and briefly describing it in your own words. So you could either get these definitions from the book. We have a lot of notes, discussion of them, and I also have a brief review later on in this section. So basically you want to pick a theory and briefly describe how it works. And of course, with this, you could do just one, or you could do more. You could, if you wanted to talk about functionalism and conflict theory, or kind of conflict theory and interactionism, that works too. Just as long as it makes sense with whatever you're doing. So no need to do more than one, but it is an option. The second part, restate your topic. So basically what topic you've been looking at. So for instance, if you're looking at homelessness, the problem of homelessness in the community, you might say something like, my topic has been homelessness, and I'm going to use conflict theory to take a look at the problem. Conflict theory is useful because it looks at power dynamics in our society, and we might be able to take a look to see how the poor and marginalized are left without homes and the health care system, for example. And this would be going to the third part, applying your theory to the topic. So for instance, what would a conflict theory theorist say about global warming at the topic? So you could actually directly state that. I'm going to be using conflict theory to discuss global warming. Maybe talk about industry and how industry owners use the political system to reinforce the rules for their benefit, etc. So in addition to this, so that's the basic idea. As long as you cover these 3 points, you should be fine. Again, we're looking for about a page to 3. And however this best helps you to kind of get your ideas out on paper is fine. So additional notes, you could also add on some of the theories based on some of the other ideas we've talked about. So you might include Gloria Anzaldúa, Silvia Federici, Paulo Freire, Michel Foucault, and Panopticon, and how these ideas might work with some of the theories. I'm going to scroll down here real quick just to show you something. This last part, I have suggestions on how you might use these. So for instance, they don't necessarily neatly fall in any one particular category. So for instance, Foucault could be considered a conflict theorist or from the interactionist perspective, because I think Panopticon could go well with this interactionist perspective. Silvia Federici would be great for a conflict perspective. Feminism. Paulo Freire is a conflict theorist, but also might be able to be used as an interactionist. Anzaldúa is a great conflict theorist, and that intersects with feminism and queer theory, as well as interactionism. And finally, Durkheim, we talked briefly about him, about his book Suicide, and he's a functionalist. So if any one of these theories stuck out to you throughout the course, or in the book, or in one of your readings, you might be able to go use any one of these or any other ones we've talked about or you've come across in the book and use these. So you might start off, if you're going back to our example here, apply your topic. So what would a conflict theorist say about global warming? And you might say specifically, I'm using conflict theory, specifically Gloria Anzaldua's work on the mestiza or mixed identity and how this might inform topics of global warming. So then you could talk about both conflict theory in general, introduce that, and then talk about Anzaldua's work, from our notes and the video lectures we've had. So you could do something like that. But so I'm going to go into a brief review down here, just as far as some of the major theories. So these notes I basically pulled from the notes we had the class so far. Not only introducing what each theory is, but another place you could look is the section where we talked about deviance in class. So go back to our deviance notes and start talking about it's the deviance chapter in the book, and what each of these theories have to say about deviance might be helpful. So for instance, functionalism is the basic idea for this, is everything has a place as part of a larger system. So Durkheim, for instance here, Durkheim and Merton both had versions of this. Durkheim, like I said earlier, he had the book about suicide, and he did this study on different groups, where groups that had less social connections and felt more alone were more likely to commit suicide. Whereas groups that had more social connections felt better about things and less likely to commit suicide. So these sorts of things about how each person functions as a whole in society is basically what they're looking at. So he calls it anomie, or feeling of normlessness or isolation. Merton talked about adaptation is the key term here. Basically how people adjust the means and ends of social norms. The example we gave here was criminals may have the same goals as others. So, for instance, everyone may have the desire to become upwardly mobile and become wealthy in society. Whereas if you have a college degree and get a so-called legitimate job, you might be more likely to get a legal job. Whereas, so the ends there are legitimate, whereas the means might also be legitimate. A criminal might have the same goal of making money, but they might do it in technically illegal terms. So all these are looking at the idea that everything in society functions as part of a larger system. So when things are dysfunctional, for instance, when things are deviants, many things in the system are not working. So there's less harmony in the system. So deviance in this case defines limited behavior. So that would be the functionalist perspective, and the picture we had for this, the image we had of this was the human body. So like each part of the body has a role in the overall functioning of the body. The second perspective we had was the interactionist perspective. So this is the one where we drew the pyramid, where the interactionist is interested in looking at the bottom of the pyramid where people are interacting with each other. And this process ends up building up to making society. The big thing we got out of this is symbols represent truths, and symbols have real consequences. So though these things may not necessarily actually exist, they're just ideas, they have real consequences. We talked a lot about maybe film instances of how a movie may depict like racism in American society, and those images may be motivating to help people move and change society, or stereotypes that we have are just symbols that represent a group. Even though they're symbols, they actually have real consequences because they result in physical harm of other people. So essentially, symbolic interactionists are interested in looking at symbols at the micro level. Art was a big aspect of this, so we talk a lot about film, TV, music, how art can help you feel connected with other people. One of the forms of deviance that we found with this one was labeling theory. So labeling theory is this idea of not necessarily why people do things or why they don't do things, but what happens when we label them as such. An example we gave is if a teacher labels a student as a bad student in the very beginning of a class, then that student might actually start acting as a bad student. So if the teacher announced the first day of class, this student has no chance of being able to make it. These actually can affect the outcomes of the student. Similarly, they talk about this with criminal behavior. If someone is labeled as a criminal in the very beginning, it might lead to them becoming more criminal-like because they're being alienated and pushed out of society. The conflict perspective, this big one was this the study of power. That's why this is bolded. Who has it and who doesn't have it. So the main idea here, I would say, is the basis is the interaction between two opposing groups. We talked about bosses and workers, for instance, where bosses and workers have opposite goals. Workers want to get higher wages, but bosses want to pay less in order to make more money. So in this case, there's a constant tension between the two groups. And conflict theorists are interested in looking at this tension between groups and seeing how that changes society. Further, one of the examples that we had with this is with deviance. Laws and policing and general ideas like that are used to preserve power. From class, we might have talked about the prohibition. So for instance, how we think of the prohibition when alcohol was made illegal in the late 20s, early 30s, was because it was a morally bad thing. Rather, a conflict theorist would argue that it might be more likely that alcohol was made illegal because workers tended to organize or make groups and unions and challenge the bosses when they went to pubs, for example. So this was made illegal so that the workers could not organize and challenge their bosses. So essentially saying that by looking at the tension between the two groups, you're able to actually find out what the actual reason is that folks are opposing certain things. So not necessarily for moral reasons, but more for discouraging organizing. So again, you could look at each one of these sub-theories, Foucault, Federici, Freire, Anzaldúa, Durkheim, and what they have to say, and how they might contribute to what you're talking about. So if any one of these theories particularly speaks out to you, or these theorists gives you an idea of what you want to talk about, go for it and use that as a way to talk about this. Alternatively, if none of these really seem to fit, you could also see what they have to say about your topic and maybe disagree with them on how this thing doesn't give you a full picture. My main goal for us here is to just be taking a look at what a theorist is saying and applying a theory to the work that you're already doing. So as long as you are engaging with a theory, a sociological theory, and applying it to your topic, that's all we're really looking for here. So again, overall goal, as long as you have picked a theory, but if you describe it in any one of the ones we've talked about, restating your topic, and if it helps, just might even literally just say, I'm using this theory, conflict theory, for example, and I'm going to be talking about this topic. And for instance, a person using this conflict theory would have this to say about my topic. And it could be really anything you want to use. So go ahead and email me with any questions you might have, and we could go over this. But essentially, as long as you're addressing these points, you should be perfectly fine with a paper. So I wish you all the best of luck, and have a good week.